This morning I want to speak for my period of time about David and aging. When you turn to 1 Kings chapter 1, 1 Kings chapter 1, there are a couple of statements that are made here in the first 2 or 3 verses that grab my attention when I begin to think about the life of this man. It says in verse 1, now King David was old, advanced in years, and they put covers on him, but he could not get warm. Therefore his servant said to him, let a young woman, a virgin, be sought for our lord the king, and let her stand before the king, and let her care for him, and let her lie in your bosom, and that our lord the king may be warm. So they sought for a lovely young woman throughout all the territory of Israel, and found Abishag the Shunammite, and brought her to the king. The young woman was very lovely. She cared for the king and served him, but the king did not know her. As we read this in our Bible, our black and white, it may seem like that this story that is told here about Abishag being brought to the king and he's going to lie in her bosom and she's going to care for him might suggest that there's something that is immoral or untoward here. But if we read it that way, then we read it erroneously. What it simply said is, David, you're old and you get cold and you can't get warm and you need a nurse to care for you. And here's this lovely young woman that comes and she's going to care for him as a nurse would care for an older man. David is probably around 70 years old at this time. And that would have been old for him. I mean, he has been weathered hard. He's been, as the old saying is, he's been rode hard and put away wet. A lot of it is his own choosing, for sure. At this time, David has a problem simply getting warm. And what I take from that is, as you like to turn to the book of Ecclesiastes, is that if you live long enough, and I don't mean for this to be cute, I mean it to be real, if you live long enough, you're going to get old. For all the technological advances that we have in our society with regard to medicine, there's just one thing that medical technology has not learned to forestall, and that is age. As someone has said, the moment we're born, we begin dying, we begin aging. The process comes to termination sooner for others than it does others, but nonetheless, the aging process begins. And Paul identified Ecclesiastes chapter 12 on Friday night, and I'd like to echo something he said, then go into the point I want to make about this. Ecclesiastes 12, beginning in verse 1 going forward, was not written to help old people understand they're going to be old. In fact, verse 1 of chapter 12 says, remember the Creator in the days of thy youth. And what he's saying is, remember the days of the Creator in the days of your youth, not because you might die tomorrow, but because you're probably going to live. And here's Solomon looking back. And as he looks back, I think he's reflecting about his father David here and the life of his father David. But the book of Ecclesiastes is to tell the young man, listen to the old man, and what I'm trying to tell you is about what life is about and what it's not about. And if you put all your eggs in the same basket thinking that your youth is going to be around with you all your life, then you are mistaken. You need to prepare for your life while you're young, because there are going to be some weary days that are going to come. And when those weary days come, those are going to be the days that what you have built in your youth are going to be your foundation. In verse 2, he says, while the sunlight and the moon and the stars are not darkened, the clouds do not return in the rain. He's talking about having no pleasure in when basically your ability to process the things that impress you, because your ability to process is not as much sharp as it was. Maybe that ability to process is not as sharp because there's been some mental deterioration that's taken place. Age brings that, it seems like. Maybe it's because later on he will talk about the ears don't work quite as well. My dad had a memory test last week with a neurologist. Been some concern about some ancillary things happening with him, and so he went to a neurologist, and Dad is 92, be 93 in November. He doesn't hear well, and that is not an overstatement. I mean, he doesn't hear well at all. And there's nothing that can be done about it. And he can sit in a room like this and just have a blank stare on his face because he doesn't hear. It's hard for him. And you might think, well, this old man's losing it. Except in the memory test, they gave him 30 questions and asked him to repeat things back. He only missed 2. And all along the test, they're asking him to quote passages from the Bible and the New Testament. And he didn't miss a passage until the doctor said, "Can you quote me something in Hebrew?" Well, he stumbled. The point I'm making about it is, it seems like sometimes when people are older that things that impressed them the once don't impress them now, but it's not the case. It's the fact that their ability to process has changed. And that's what Solomon is saying here. He said the clouds don't return after the rain. And the day when the keepers of the house tremble, the strong men bow down, the arms that were once strength, the legs that were once solid, the grinders, the teeth that once were strong are few. They look through the window, the eyes are no longer sharp. The doors are shut in the streets, and the sound of grinding low, the ears have become dull. However, when one bird rises up at the sound, they begin to perk up. They can hear the slightest thing, but can't hear anything. And then he said, the daughters of music are brought low. The voice is no longer strong. They're afraid of height and the terrors in the way. Once sure as they would take their step, once confident as they would move, now that step is halted. That step is not as sure. And he said, the almond tree blossoms, the gray hair comes, the grasshoppers are burdened, the desires fail. For man goes to eternal home, and the mourners go about the street. And what Solomon is doing, looking back, thinking about his father perhaps, is saying, I remember seeing this in Dad. I remember seeing how this affected Dad. And Solomon looks back over the life of his youth, and he sees the absolute vanity of how he has wasted himself in doing that. But what Solomon says to us here, alas, is, listen, remember your Creator before the silver cord is loosened and the golden bowl is broken, or the pitcher shattered in the fountain, or the wheel broken at the veil, and the dust shall return to the earth. Remember your Creator in the days of your youth, because one day you're going to answer for that. You're going to stand before God, and don't waste it in vanity. Age is going to come, and the debilitations of age are going to come. And we who are younger have no way to appreciate that because we've never been old. When we look at our aged family, our aged brethren, it's amazing how we can be critical of them when we're younger. But look, I've never been 88. I've never been 85, and I've never been 92. And there are a few of us in this room that have not been that way. Some are. And what we need to realize is, just simply because they seem like they no longer get it and no longer connect does not mean that's the case. They still have value. And we have no right to diminish them with disrespect. In fact, we're going to answer for that, because God puts value on age, not youth. We are to honor those of age. In our society, we value youth. We drink at the well of youth. We are immersed in the culture of youth. And by that, I do not by any means tend to diminish young people at all. I value them. But God places value in age, because age has lived with that frailty of the flesh and has now come to the point in time in their life where there's but one thing to do: lay the tabernacle down and go be with Him. The second thing I'd like to pull from the life of David is this: Age is a time in which you reflect upon the mistakes of your life. And again, there have to be a few skins on the wall, a few experiences in life to be able to do that. I think about David, and I think about the mistakes that David made in his life. I think, first of all, if you turn to the book of 2 Samuel, chapter 21. 2 Samuel chapter 21. You have this statement, verse 15, reading down through verse 17. David is a mighty warrior. In fact, one reason that he's not allowed to build the temple is because God said, you're a man of blood. You can't build the temple, but your son will be able to do so. That had to be a disappointment with David. We'll talk about that in a moment. But here in verse 15, there's something that amazes me in this story. When the Philistines were at war against Israel, David and his servants with him went down and fought against the Philistines, and David grew faint. And Ishbi ben Ab, who was one of the sons of the giant, the weight of whose bronze spear was 300 shekels, and who was bearing a new sword, thought he could kill David. And Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, came to his aid and struck the Philistine and killed him. Then the men of David swore to him, saying, you shall go no more out with us to battle, lest you quench the lamp of Israel. Do we understand what's happening here? David, you're a man of war, and you fought a lot of wars, you've led a lot of wars, but listen, no more. We can't afford for you to go to the battlefield. David, you've gotten old, and you grew faint on the battlefield, and we can't take that risk anymore. You can no longer lead the men in battle. Listen, you stay home, and we'll take care of the battle. We'll lead the war. No more, David. You can't do this anymore. Did you get that? David, you've gotten old, and you can't do this anymore. I don't know that those of us who are younger can appreciate what that does to a person. You know why? Because nobody's telling us we can't do it anymore. Nobody's telling us, you know, those things you used to could do that came real easy, but now they exhaust you. Now you tire real easy. Now you faint. Now you wear out easier. You know those things that we used to lean on you to do, those things that you used to lead us in doing. Listen, now you can't do that anymore. You know that church for whom you used to be a shepherd? You know that gospel you used to preach? You know those songs you used to lead? You know those prayers you used to pray? You know those classes you used to teach? Listen, you're getting too old. You can't do it anymore. Young people don't identify with you. Listen, you just let us do it for a while. What you need to do is you just need to sit down, you just need to rest. And what they've done with David is a forced retirement. They said to David, look, no more. Do we understand what that does to a person? This is purely from the book of Ricky. This is not from the book of God. But it would seem to me like that if you've got a man like David, and you've got people like our older saints who are still willing to do what they can do, when they can do it, however they can do, that we who are younger ought to check ourselves to say, we think it's time for you to sit on the sidelines while we take over. They have earned the right to tell us when they're too tired. They've earned the right to tell us. But when we look at them and just say, you know, you're just getting old. You know, you stammer, you stutter, you halt, you're just not quite what you were. You know, you don't lead that song quite as vigorously as you did. That prayer just not quite as melodic as it once was. You know, that class just not quite as good. Who's the problem? David, you can't go to war anymore. The second thing I think about the life of David, I think about that scene we all know. You think about David, that there's two things you think about generally. He's out in the field watching sheep, or what? Bathsheba. And there's no way to get around it. He blew it. He blew it royally. Here's a man up to this point that's said to be a man after God's own heart. It's interesting that if I've observed correctly, and that could be wrong, that's never said about David after that. Because David, as you turn to 2 Samuel chapter 12, you begin to see when Nathan comes to him and begins to unfold all that David has ignored to this point. Well, not necessarily ignored personally, but ignored the consequences of making it right, I would say. Nathan comes to him, and it says in verse 9, "Why have you despised the commandment of the Lord to do evil in his sight? You have killed Uriah the Hittite with a sword. You have taken his wife to be your wife, and you have killed him with the sword of Ammon. Now therefore the sword shall never depart from your house, because you have despised me and taken the wife of Uriah the Hittite. Thus says the Lord your God, I will raise up adversity against you from your own house. I will take your wives before your eyes and give them to your neighbor, and shall lie with your wives in sight of his son, in the sight of this son." David, you're going to pay dearly for this, and David did. Later on, he weeps in this very same chapter because of the loss of a child. And maybe the thing that hurt him the most was he knows the child dies because of him. Living with your mistakes? As long as he lives, is he ever going to forget that? You turn back to 1 Kings chapter 1, and you see another thing in the life of David that's significant. Continue the reading in verse 5. 1 Kings chapter 1 and verse 5. "Then Adonijah the son of Haggith exalted himself, saying, I will be king, and he prepared for himself chariots and horsemen and 50 men to run before him." Notice now verse 6. "And his father had not rebuked him at any time by saying, Why have you done so? He was also very good looking. His mother born him after Absalom." Here's Adonijah, who asserts himself to the throne, and in none of the life of Adonijah did David ever restrain him. It seems like that was the pattern for David as a parent. You see the same thing with Amnon and Tamar. You see with Absalom going in because her brother abuses her, and Absalom takes Amnon's life, and David didn't restrain him. But here's Adonijah going to assert himself to the throne, and David has to deal with that. Eventually, Solomon takes the throne as the story unfolds, and Adonijah's life is taken from him. Amazing. Talk about the mistakes. David lived with that. The mistakes of the death of the child, the loss of a son he would not discipline, the rage of a son he would not assuage, and the ego of a son he would not tame. The sword never departed from the house of David. Then you come to the numbering of the people, 2 Samuel chapter 24. David numbers the people, and God calls him on the carpet for that because he should have done so. And then God says, "I'll give you the choice of what you want. I'm going to punish you, but you get to choose one of three." And David said, "You choose." And 70,000 people died because of that. You think David ever reached the time in his life where he forgot that because he did not restrain himself, it cost him those people? Verse 17 of 2 Samuel chapter 24, "Then David spoke to the Lord when he saw the angel was striking the people, and said, Surely I have sinned, I have done wickedly, but these sheep, what have they done? Let your hand, I pray, be against me and against my father's house." Here are the mistakes of David. And David sees those mistakes. He sees how those mistakes have affected others. Seldom do mistakes like this happen in a vacuum. They affect people who touch us in every direction, every tentacle. The butterfly effect, except here's the butterfly effect in the negative way. The butterfly waves his wings, and the ripples just go out and touch people. Well, here's the fault of David, and the butterfly waves his wings, and the fault of David just continues to ripple and affect 70,000 people. Imagine what David is seeing. Here, Joab, he loses. Absalom, he loses. Ammon, he loses. Adonijah, he loses. These people, 70,000 lives lose because of David. The mistakes of David. He can't sit in his house when he's an old man and say, "You know, this has just been great. the mistakes of his life begin to come back. But if that's true, there's something else that's equally true. Not only do we age if we live long enough, and not only do the mistakes of our life begin to come back to haunt us, but we need to also see in view of all that we can have a life well lived and a story well told, and that we can go on, because there can be joy of growing old in Christ. Think about that for just a moment. Paul began with this passage in 2 Corinthians chapter 4 on Friday night. In 2 Corinthians chapter 4, the Apostle Paul talks about the wasting of the flesh, but the renewing of the Spirit. What a tremendous passage from this older saint that helps us see this. Verse 16 of 2 Corinthians 4. Therefore we don't lose heart, even though our outward man is perishing, yet the inward man is being renewed day by day. For a light affliction, which is but for a moment, is but a far more exceeding eternal weight of glory, while we do not look at the things which are seen, but the things which are not seen. For the things which are seen are temporary, but the things which are not are seen are eternal. Paul is saying, look, I realize as an older man, my life is waning, the windows are shutting, the clouds are getting gray. I realize the time is fast approaching. And actually death wasn't that far away from Paul at this point. 10 years or more maybe. But he said, in spite of how this outward man is perishing, you wake up every morning and Dr. Arthur's there with you. Arthritis. You wake up in the morning, you're not as fluid, you're not as agile as you once were. The aches and the pains of the years begin to build up. David said, the outward man is perishing. We're reminded of that when we look in the mirror. But he said, inwardly, that man's being renewed day by day. This man's getting old, the inside man's getting young. The old man's getting young, he's being renewed day by day. There's joy in that. And the joy comes from the fact that we know what we can do when we're older is there's still something that can be done for us. Someone once said that youth is the sunrise and age is the sunset. But seldom do we talk about the noonday. And you think about that for just a moment. Youth is such a vital time and enthusiastic time of our life. It is such a time of idealism. It's such a time to enjoy. Maybe not until you get older do you realize how much of your youth that you lost the enjoyment of. There are a lot of mulligans I'd like to have in my life. But the days of my youth would be one big mulligan I'd like to have over again, to enjoy a whole lot more. But you think about the idealism of youth. Everything is out before us. I think about these young people that we have here that is so awesome, we love so much. I think and I look at them, I think, man, the future is so bright and great for them. Their dreams, their ideals, their hopes, everything that is out, everything just so rich there. And then we get married, we finish our education, children come, careers begin to be built and established. Life becomes busy, activities increase because of the activities with all of our children, our life, our jobs and everything. And it seems like at some time, if we're not careful, the Lord's kind of put on the back burner there. Not forgotten, just not where he was. It's just not the focal point as sharply as we'd like for it to be. But then age comes, and along with age, all those things that once were the crush that pressed down upon us seem now to have been fulfilled, and now there is that resharpening of the focus on God. There's that new attention that we have, that we realize how precious he really is to our life, because now what we've done is we've gotten some life under our belt, some experiences that have happened, and we've realized the great value that he holds to us, the great security that he brings to us, the great confidence we can grow in him. We can have him because we understand he is our all in all. Paul will say in Philippians chapter 3 and verse 12, I've not already attained, but I press on, that I may hold of those, lay hold of something. I've not been captivated. I've not captured that for which I've been captivated. But I'm pressing on. I'm looking forward to something. And what Paul helps us see is when you see Christ in an older person, you have seen real beauty. I tell you, we have some beautiful people in this church. But none are more beautiful than those who we have of age in whom Christ lives. Because we see Him shining bright in their lives. And so you see, what we find out is there's something more we can do. And then what we get to do is we get to correct those mistakes. You know, David did correct the mistake with Adonijah. He did rise up and say, no, you're not going to be it. Solomon's going to be it. Now, the end wasn't good for Adonijah. But that's another thing. But he did correct the mistake. How many times when we've lived a while that we see a person begin, regardless of age, they begin so enthusiastically, so on fire. But then, like a house of fire, they just burn out. But then there's that person that seems to be less than somewhat, that sits back in the corner, hardly noticed, but day in, day out, week in, week out, year in, year out, they are just solid. They're just faithful. They're dependable. And you see them growing, and you see them working. Never thought, said he. Never thought, said she. It's amazing when you're old how much of the world you see. And the 103rd Psalm, the first 5 verses, say something about that. 103rd Psalm, verses 1 through 5. Bless the Lord, O my soul, and all that is in me. Bless His holy name. Bless the Lord, O my soul, and forget not all His benefits. Who forgives all your iniquities, who heals all your diseases, who redeems your life from destruction, who crowns you with loving kindness and tender mercies, who satisfies your mouth with good things so that your mouth is renewed like eagles. I would suggest you have to have lived some years to be able to appreciate that. And what the psalmist is saying here is that, listen, you can make those things that were wrong right. And in fact, if you go on down to verse 11, for as the heavens are high above the earth, so great is His mercy toward those who fear Him. As far as the east is from the west, so far as He removed our transgressions from our sins, as the Father pities His child, so the Lord pities those who fear Him. He knows our frame, and He remembers that we are dust. Si Joseph can read that and get it. But he can't get it like Papa Joe can. Because Papa Joe's just got more there than Si does. And what the psalmist is saying here is, look, there's something more for you to do, and you can do it. When you think about David correcting mistakes, you think about the unfulfilled dreams, but David could fulfill those dreams. Turn to 1 Chronicles chapter 28. Here you have the story in which David is now going to be able to supply what's necessary for the temple. Beginning in 1 Chronicles 28, verse 6. Now he said to me, it's your son Solomon who shall build the house, my courts. For I have chosen him to be my son, and I will be his father. Moreover, I will establish his kingdom forever, if he is steadfast to observe my commandments and the judgment as it is this day. Now therefore, in the sight of all Israel, the assembly of the Lord and the hearing of God, be careful to seek out all those commandments of the Lord your God, that you may possess this good land and leave it as an inheritance for your children forever and ever. David could correct the mistakes. He could have those unfulfilled dreams fulfilled. David can't build the temple, but he collects everything that is to be provided for the temple. He sets the priests, he sets the magicians that are there, and then the word goes out as David has commanded. As David has commanded. What David is saying is, look, I've got my part, you've got your part. I'll collect all the materials. I can't build it, But I can make that man of war right. I can provide everything my son's going to need. I'm learning this. I'm learning this from both perspectives. Children. I guess that involves everybody in this room, right? Your parents can live the unfulfilled dreams through you. How? Because you can be their crown of glory. Because they can see your faith. They can see your struggles. They can see your disappointments. But what they can do is they can see their unfulfilled dreams being fulfilled in you because they see you. They see you ready to build that temple. Don't you think David just for a little bit puffed out his chest? I tell you, my children do right. Those are the happiest days of my life. When my children struggle, those are the hardest days of my life. And I see that in my mom and dad with us. You see, their unfulfilled dreams become fulfilled in every one of us. Don't think, young people, because you are young, your parents do not notice you, and older people overlook you. You are the fulfillment of their dreams. And finally, in Psalm 71, before the final bell rings, you have this psalm. Beginning in verse 20. You have shown me great and severe troubles, and shall revive me again and bring me up again from the depths of the earth. You shall increase my greatness and comfort me on every side. And here's the old man saying, look, you have your story, I have my story. Let me tell my story as long as I can tell my story. Please listen to my story, because I want to listen to your story. There's something still to do. Stay fresh. Keep your mind active. Keep your body as strong as age will let you. Stay mentally sharp. Young people, you know what old people want? The same thing you do. Young people, don't you want people to recognize you? Do you want them looking through you, looking over you? Do you want them respecting you? Do you want them noticing you? Everybody needs admiration, appreciation, affection, and approval. Everybody needs admiration, affection, appreciation, and approval. It doesn't matter whether you're old or whether you're young. That's what everybody needs. Over 30 years ago, D. Bowman preached a lesson in a series he called Godly Homes in Wicked Society. And the title of it was Respect for Age. At the close of his lesson, he gave these practical observations to the elderly. Try to be a part. Sometimes it's hard, but only those older persons who maintain social relationships stay happy and healthy. Live with age. You've lived with every other one. Why not this one? Accept the challenge. The time to quit is not now, and there's work for all of us to do. Offer yourselves. Many times, others would like your help, but are embarrassed to ask. Do not you be too embarrassed to offer. Command respect. Carry yourself as good as your health and age will show. Stand up for old age. It has advantages, and you know it. Teach someone something. You can leave a legacy. You can leave a legacy that will live on and multiply many times over if you will just teach someone some good thing. Make friends of the young. To have a friend, you must be one. Young friends will benefit from such a relationship and keep you thinking young too. Pass it on. I think every older person chooses someone to whom they can pass on a torch. Give of yourself freely so all who come after you will benefit from your having lived. Get out of yourselves. Give some thought time toward service to others. There's no place in the life of any Christian for selfishness, be he young or old. Continue to put God first. Even though it's not easy to admit, the aged person is probably near death. But even that has its advantages. It can motivate toward preparation. Use it wisely. Thanks, Dee. Our time is up for the class. Thank you for listening.